years that I've been teaching Scripture as a professor, the one book that I get more questions about than any other book of the Bible is Genesis, Genesis, Genesis. Were Adam and Eve really historical figures? Who wrote the books of Moses? What about J, E, D, and P, this modern scholarly theory about the sources of Genesis and the Pentateuch? Did Abraham exist? What about the patriarchs and the miracles of the Exodus? Did Moses really part the waters of the Red Sea and lead the Israelites into the desert? How do we interpret the ages of the patriarchs in the book of Genesis, like Methuselah living hundreds and hundreds of years? What has the church said about evolution and the origins of humanity, the fall, original sin? How do we interpret the book of Genesis and the other books of the Pentateuch, like Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy? What about holy war in the book of Deuteronomy? What about the laws of ritual purity and impurity, of clean and unclean foods in the book of Leviticus? And all these difficult passages in the Old Testament that are mostly located in Genesis and in the books of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. In this in-depth study on Genesis and the books of Moses, I take you through those questions step by step, looking at all of the key passages focused in Genesis, but also in all 5 books of the Pentateuch, in order to answer these questions from a Catholic perspective, drawing on not just what Scripture says, not just what history and archaeology reveal to us, but also the teaching of the early church fathers and the teachings of the magisterium. This is one of the most exciting portions in all of sacred Scripture, especially for the Jewish people. To the Jews, the 5 books of Moses were like what the 4 Gospels are to Christians. They were the foundations of sacred Scripture. They were the foundations of salvation history. This is where the major covenants with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Noah, all of these covenants are made in the books of the Pentateuch. So if you've ever wanted to dive into not just these difficult questions, but the profoundly theologically rich passages in the books of Genesis and the other books of the Pentateuch, then I would strongly encourage you to pick up this series and begin this study. No portion of the Old Testament is more controversial, and no portion of the Old Testament is more rewarding for those who study it in an in-depth way. Another question people often ask, what about the sons of God and the daughters of men in the book of Genesis chapter 6? How do we make sense of this? Is this mythology or is it history? How has the tradition interpreted such passages? If you've ever wondered about these and many other questions, or if you just wanted to get a better grasp of the Old Testament foundations of the New Testament Christian faith, then I invite you to come with me and walk through Genesis and the books of Moses step by step in this in-depth Bible study.